Episode 199, First Principles Continued, Seeds. This is the World Organic News for the week ending 20th of January 2020. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. This week we continue our journey down the first principles rabbit hole with a look at seeds. Seeds are a many splendid thing, from the dust-like powder of tiff seeds all the way up to the monster broadbean seeds. They all have one thing in common. They are life in suspended animation. Our task as gardeners is to release that life into its most favoured conditions. Thankfully, most seeds have similar needs, and this makes our task somewhat simpler. Before we actually get to sowing, and that's a whole different podcast, let's look at our options. GMO seeds. Oh, possibly heresy 101. Bear with me on this. I'm not advocating for salmon genes being added to tomatoes to make them frost hardy, and this is a thing that's been done. In fact, I'm advocating for what GMO seeds were originally developed to do. Basically, a GMO seed is one that has been manipulated through its genetic makeup in a laboratory. Now, these techniques showed originally great promise for plant breeders, but Monsanto ruined it for everyone by splicing resistance to the herbicide Roundup into the genes of some plants. Corn, soybeans and cotton are probably the best known. This means these not only can be, but to cover the extra costs of the seeds, need to be sprayed with Roundup. The Roundup wipes out all other plants and leaves the GMO plants in inverted commas unaffected. This led to a huge increase in Roundup usage, with paddocks and gardens flooded with the stuff. The ongoing litigation regarding this weed killer's connection with cancer taints not just Monsanto, but the idea of genetically modified seeds in general. The techniques could have been used to simply speed up standard plant breeding techniques. So instead of crossing varieties to find a useful trait, say drought resistance, the gene for that, once identified, could have been spliced into a high-yielding variety of the same cultivar, of the same species, and a new high-yielding, drought-resistant variety created. In much the same way that rust resistance was bred into wheat here in Australia by Faraday, these things could have been sped up in the laboratory. However, the Monsanto effect now smears all GMO endeavours. Luckily, though, we have more than enough options to be going on with seed-wise. Our next type of seed is hybrid seeds. This option relies on the notion effect of hybrid vigour. When two relatively unrelated strains of a plant, or an animal for that matter, are mated, their offspring exhibits generally increased growth rate, size and vigour. And this means, of course, bigger harvests. As with all things in life, there is a trade-off. When the seeds collected from hybrid plants are sown again, they tend to revert back to their two grandparent varieties. This means it is not worth the effort of saving seeds and replanting these hybrids. This way of breeding seeds has been taken to extremes in some cases, multiple crosses, back crosses and so on, until the desired characteristics are arrived at. Each cross, naturally enough, puts a little more cost onto the end user. After all, there's another season in development. This is offset by the greater production, sort of. These crosses and selection decisions are based upon fairly tightly defined sets of parameters. Artificial fertiliser, irrigation and between the rows herbicide use are all carefully calibrated to the growth cycle of the plants. A change in expected weather conditions, too much or not enough water, more cloud so less photosynthesis and any other variation from the standard will affect the yield. So while hybrids are well documented and productive, I'm not sure they're suited to an organic-based system. While they do, though, tend to be more productive than our next option, you must purchase seeds every season, which is an increased cost every year. And funnily enough, the price of these seeds is going up, not down. Our third category of seeds are the heirloom/heritage seeds. And the seeds from these plants can be collected and replanted year after year, and they'll throw true. They are also known as open pollinated seeds, which the hybrids and the GMO are not. While they tend to be somewhat less productive, but not by much, than hybrids, Saving your seed can more than enough offset the costs of purchasing seed every year. That comes with hybrids. And another advantage heirlooms have is flavour. Hybrids have been driven by the need to transport produce to market without it spoiling. Plant breeders have been successful in this, but the trade-off is flavour. The more currently obscure heirloom varieties were selected originally for flavour, and this is obviously the case with something like tomatoes. I've lost track of the number of people that have complained that tomatoes don't taste like they used to. A quick look around any supermarket reveals maybe 3 different varieties of standard tomatoes. There's more variation in the cherries, but they're still, to my mind, fairly tasteless. All of them have been selected for disease resistance, transportability, and shelf life. Now, your more ugly varieties, like Mortgage Lifter and Black Russian and so on, won't sit on the shelves for days, but their flavours are remarkable. And even if they don't last long at home, they do make great sauces and chutneys, again improved by the flavours they carry. Now, I've even seen a tomato jam, which is not something I was keen to try. Home preservation of harvests are not a thing of great importance to hybrid seed breeders, but they are important to the home grower. Heirloom and heritage seeds have survived in people's backyards, in their vegetable gardens, and amongst some commercial growers who could see their value. Because the produce has to travel from the garden to the kitchen, spoilage is not a consideration. The other advantage heirlooms has is local adaptation. We can select seeds from the best plants each year, whatever best means to the individual gardener. Usually best means size and flavour. Once you have your heirloom seeds, their open pollinating habit means you can start selecting for your locale from your very first harvest. After 10 or even 25 years or even several human generations growing these plants in the same spot, you will have varieties better suited to where you garden, and this is a good thing. The last advantage I think is relevant with heirlooms is their genetic base. With hybrids, the more crosses, the more tightly defined the genetic material. So it follows that heirlooms have a wider genetic base. In practice, this means a few things. Hybrids will ripen and be ready for harvest all at once, or as close to that as the breeders can achieve. Heirlooms tend to ripen over a longer period. A wider, more shallow bell curve, if that helps. Now, if it rains on the 3 days the hybrids are ready, maybe the whole crop is lost. Because some of the heirlooms are ready earlier and later than those same 3 days of rain, a harvest is still possible. Now, as climatic conditions become more variable, this ability to produce a return under different, in inverted commas, less than ideal conditions, close inverted commas, becomes more important. Now, many heirloom varieties were lost during the last century as the Green Revolution was foisted on many smallholders across the world. So we must cherish and grow our remaining varieties as often as possible, keep them viable and adapting. So by way of a summary, we have 3 options with seeds: GMO, hybrid, heirloom heritage. GMO is not recommended, hybrid has its place, heirloom and heritage would be my preferred choice. What you get to choose between is volume and flavour, but even some of the heirloom and heritage varieties have plenty of volume as well. And you can actually get to select for volume and flavour with heirlooms over time. Hybrids need to be purchased every season. Heirloom seeds need to be collected and replanted year after year. And seed collecting is a separate skill, and we'll come to that in another podcast. Overall, though, please remember, decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.